This is the Story Trails podcast. Listen in as we explore India through her stories. Every side has a story to tell. An Englishman went on a tiger hunt, but stopped in his tracks when he saw up front a U shaped cliff with a waterfall and a mysterious cave behind that watery wall. He walked inside and shone his torch around and was dazzled by the paintings he found. Red, green, blue, black, white, and bold Buddhist paintings over 2000 years old. In the hills of Sahyadri, hidden in plain sight, lies this treasure trove and artist's delight.
In 1819, Captain John Smith of the Madras Cavalry and his Indian guide were on a tiger hunt in the jungles of the Aurangabad district. This part of India, where the Sahyadri hills rise above the Deccan Plateau, was a jungle infested with tigers and bandits. It was far away from civilization, a good 430 kilometers from Bombay, and the nearest city was Aurangabad. Suddenly, Captain Smith noticed something ahead. The hill there was U shaped and there was a waterfall. And right next to it, he saw a man made cave on the edge of the cliff. Curious, he cleared the vegetation and entered the cave. He lit up a makeshift grass torch and just stood there, gaping in astonishment. Beautiful images and carvings of the Buddha and of men, women, animals, and trees jumped out at him, all colored in the most vivid hues. Captain Smith had just discovered cave number 10 of the Ajanta caves. He was so overwhelmed that he carved his name on pillar 13 of the cave, thereby becoming the discoverer and the first vandal of the Ajanta caves. He returned to Madras and dutifully reported this amazing find to his superiors. Not long after that, the Bombay Literary Society and the the Royal Asiatic Society really, confirmed this find. Eventually, 29 other caves with extensions and a brick monastery by the river valley were also discovered. And that is how the Ajanta caves came to public knowledge. The Ajanta caves are at least 2000 years old and are filled with Buddhist art. Back then, this region was ruled by two powerful dynasties, the Satavahanas, who ruled from the 2nd century BCE to the 3rd century CE, and the Vakatakas, who ruled from the 3rd to the 5th century CE. Now, over these 600 years, Buddhism too had grown as a religion, and it had seen many ups and downs. But these kings and their subjects were very respectful of Buddhism, even though they were mostly Hindu kings. And Buddhism was a major influence in the art of that period. These 30 Ajanta caves, which were basically prayer halls and monasteries, are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Story Trails podcast. Today's session is about the magnificent art of the Ajanta caves. And to help us make sense of it all, we have with us an expert art historian, Dr. Alamelu Nachiyappan. She is a former head of department and associate professor in the Fine Arts Department of Stella Maris College, Chennai. She's taught there for over 34 years, and her areas of expertise include Indian art history, modern art criticism, drawing, and design. Welcome to the Story Trails podcast, Dr. Alamelu. We are delighted that you could join us today.
Hello, all of you. I'm most happy to be here. Uh, this seems to be a very interesting way to reach out to people. Eh, So I'm very happy I'm a part of this.
Great. Thanks. And we are looking forward to your insights today. We also have with us today Akila and Kaushik from the Story Trails research team.
Hi, hi,
Hello.
and good
Hello, good
morning. Good
morning.
morning.
Great. So let's get started. And let's start at the very beginning. Dr. Alamelu, if you could tell us in layman's terms, what makes Ajanta Caves so significant?
Okay, what comes to my mind, okay, even as a young student when I started and when I visited, it's a stupendous effort of humankind in every way because the rock is hard and yet, people excavated. The interiors were dim and yet people painted. So it just goes to show the sheer effort our artists seems to have, put into this monumental, activity. Uh, the ceilings actually showcase the skill in design, and we are talking about people who lived 1500 to 2200 years ago. We need to
Mm.
remember that we are connecting with minds which are that old. So we're really going back into history.
Right, right. And we will talk in more detail about the beauty of the paintings and Ajanta. But before that, could you tell our listeners something about the religious landscape of that time? I mean, these were all Hindu kings, right? So, why would you think they supported Buddhist art?
We are talking about this time period, that is Ajanta. It was under the two different periods of activity in the at the site of Ajanta were conducted during the periods of Satavahanas and Vakatakas. Now both of them were Hindu kings, and everyone is aware of that. But what we need to remember is the U-shaped carp of rock made up of 29 caves was devoted to Buddhism only. Unlike Ellora, where they had caves devoted to Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, whereas here it
Right.
was devoted only to Buddhism. What was important is this is the area that comes under the kingdom of the Satavahanas and Vakatakas. It's not that that they themselves directly did, but Walter Spink alone says that later the Vakataka king Harisena himself commissioned one of the caves, that is cave 1. But other than that, all the caves were kind of commissioned by contributions from Buddhist laity, that is ordinary people. They had already come in existence around this area where Ajanta is in Maharashtra, in Aurangabad district. So there were plenty of Buddhists. There were Buddhist monks who commissioned. And we need to remember that Ajanta was near Python, which was an important town which was on the trade route from Bihar to, that is Patliputra in Bihar, to Pratisthana, which is Python in Maharashtra. This Python happened to be close to Ajanta. So we had this on an important trade route, as well as people contributed. Actually started as a community charity only. Slowly, all these people pulled in. Eventually, the king himself, Harisena, and then his minister, Varahamira, I'm talking about the Vakatakas. Harisena himself commissioned cave 1, and the others commissioned individual caves. And earlier Satavahanas also. But what was most important that we need to remember is both these dynasties were very ambitious dynasties and did expand their territory, were so committed to giving first expanding their empire and uh, retaining peace and stability in the area. And because they assured peace and stability, there was prosperity, there was agriculture and trade, and both of them flourished so well. So it was possible to indulge in art.
Right. So, it was not just the kings, but even the common folk who contributed to this art. Let's talk about the painting techniques that were used at Ajanta. Could you tell us something about the materials that went into these paintings? What kind of dyes were used? Tell us something about that.
See, when we begin, we have to start with the ground, which we call, that is the Ajanta cave walls. So, and that had to be prepared because they were uneven. So they would give layers of plaster to finally make it smooth. So first there was rough plaster, which comprised of brick powder, clay powder, and such. Those were the core materials. Sand was added. Besides that, vegetable peels and paddy husk. So they added such organic materials, and probably these were the reasons where the plaster did give away in some places. But this was the rough plaster. The second layer was the fine plaster. This was just lime mixed with traces of gypsum. So this was a fine layer. Over this, once it dried, they applied the pigment. Now, what was the pigment made up of? And what were the colors they used? To the lay people, the colors would be most interesting to listen to, and you'd be surprised to know that they used just 6 colors red, yellow, blue, green, black, and white. That's all. And all the other colors were just a combination of these colors. And the colors were of vegetable and mineral origin. So interesting that the artist took the colors from the soil around and from the vegetation around. It was that easy. It was drawn from the local sources. And the binding medium too was natural. Now, how did they get the six colors? The red, they got it from red ochre, which is red laterite. The same with yellow, laterite from the soil. And white was lime. Black,
Mhm.
they got it from lamp black, which we now colloquially would say soot. That's all. Blue was from lapis lazuli. That alone was a semi precious stone, and they had it imported from Afghanistan. Then green, they got it from terra earth, which is green earth, which was found around Ajanta. All these minerals were mixed to get other colors and tones.
Isn't it kind of amazing that with just those six colors,
Yeah,
they got amazing effects like
correct. Now
difference in
today,
skin tones between Indians and foreigners. I know
yes,
they're supposed to have foreign faces.
correct.
The shades of the textiles and even the ornaments.
Everything,
I-
even pearls, no, the way they painted. And in the Bodhisattva, the pink, he's like a poster boy for Ajanta. We all know that. All of you,
yes,
it's a very common, yeah, image that comes up in any website or anything. So, the eyes, the softness, all those, they managed to get with just these, and these are from the soil. They
mm,
didn't have any tube colors or whatever that is available to the present day artist.
Right. So, what about the painting style itself? Was there anything unique about the technique? Anything that a layperson like me can also register and appreciate?
As for the painting you talked about painting technique, color, etc. How did they express? They did not use the Renaissance perspective. They used what we call the Indian kind, which is tilted plane or multiple perspective. So whoever is on top is actually to be understood as behind. So if I wanted to draw somebody behind, I simply drew him above, okay, on the
Oh,
pictorial surface. That's all.
okay, okay. So
And
near the ceiling is somebody behind.
yes, we have to
Huh.
understand that way. And hierarchies, see, today when we teach drawing, that's the first thing we tell kids. Please don't draw them one on top of the other. That doesn't mean recession in space. But here they managed to do it so well. And hierarchic scaling. Supposing Buddha had to be represented, he was definitely a very important person in the Buddhist pantheon. So he could not be scaled to the human you know level.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, size, he had
He
to
would
be
be bigger than
represented
the others.
huge, right? And shading, another, we hear, when you look at modern photography or realistic paintings, it reflects a light source that is from the left, means the shadow will be cast to the right, but
Mhm.
this is only around the contour, just to make it three dimensional. So when there is darkness on both sides of the arm stands almost like round. And how do they narrate the stories? That again, they could say, they did in some stories, they did say first scene, second scene, and so on. They did paint like that. But in some others, they just chose one important scene and represented. The people were so knowledgeable that they would know that this means that particular story. There was also another way in which they painted, that was geographic narrative. That is, whatever happened within the palace would be to one side, whatever happened in a forest would be to one side. But because people knew the stories, they were able to understand. So the Buddhists then and the artists themselves, they all knew the stories. They all knew the philosophies. So it didn't they didn't necessarily have to say it as scene one, scene two, etc. No confusion
Right.
at all. And one last thing I'd like to talk about when it comes to painting, that is true for all Indian painting. The opening of eyes is the most important step. That
Mm.
gives the soul to the painting. So the
Correct.
artist would do everything, and when it came to the eyes, that would be the last, whatever expression. And they were capable of immense expression, different kinds, inward looking, happy, bright. or excited, amazed, etc. All the possible expressions.
Oh, so when the picture is drawn, it's just there. The eyes are not filled in at all. That will be the
So,
last thing that is
yes,
done.
yes. When they paint, the underpainting would be there, but the
Mm.
final detailing, the jewelry, everything would be done. But the
Mm.
opening of eyes breathes the life into painting. But that is true of most Indian painting.
Hmm. So, if you had to compare this style with any other, let's say the Tanjavur style of frescoes, how does this technique differ from that style?
Okay. First, we need to understand fresco would mean only when it is done on wet plaster. Ajanta is mural painting. You could say it's tempera because it is done on dry plaster. So that is the major difference between Tanjavur and wet. Yeah, that's what historians have said, right? Because nobody really can go into it because some when they did some chemical analysis, they are not sure. It could be wet in some places, dry in some places.
All right. I have one more layperson's question. How exactly do art experts know how to date these different styles?
I've attended several seminars where all these, researchers will just say, see, this earring and that earring, they are similar. So this is the same time period. That is a very, yeah, very easy way of doing it. But styles do matter. For example, Vijayanagara Nayaka and all, they would look at the pillars and decide. So in some ways, even Walter Spink has used architectural features of the caves around and so on when he dated. Then the
Mm.
painting techniques also. Now, if you take up Ajanta, there are two different styles. We know that the pre-classical period is how they have termed it, which will be the second and first centuries BC.
Mm.
Now, how do we distinguish this with the later classical period, which is fourth and fifth centuries CE, Common Era? Shivarama Murthy, in his book South Indian Paintings, gives us this difference between the Satavahanas and Vakatakas. He says, and because why do we depend on them? Because these paintings don't exist now. So
Oh.
all our information comes only from books. So that's why I'm quoting Shivarama Murthy. And he says that their figures were similar to the sculpture of that period. See, that's one way. If I
Mm.
paint like the sculpture of my time period, then my time period gets registered in my painting also. So that is one. And they did present, like, they showed that there has been a long tradition before them, only that they don't remain now because they probably were on brick mansions and so on, which are perishable and would have, or mud, whatever the material, timber
Mm.
possibly,
Mm.
and they have perished. So we don't have that tradition alive now. And even something like in a cave and deep interiors, cavernous interiors, we have lost them. But Shivrama Murthy saw them. Okay, and
Oh.
1819, when you are, the when we talk about John Smith, he saw most of them. Yeah.
Right.
So completely, completely.
Oh.
But how he decides is wherever there was a round face, slim figures, eyes were large and open. The classical period, eyes would look sidelong, and there
Mm.
were heavy turban, simple dresses, simple jewelry. There was pearl, which was also used later, but not complicated in design. So all this Shivaramamurthy and that generation, they have seen. The book is around 1960s, so it was there at that time. Okay, so that is how he tells us. Now, as for the Vakatakas, everything becomes more elaborate, more sophisticated. As I told you, there is within them a classical period and also a slightly mannered period, and each period reflects its own. The what I had talked about as round faces became oval. The eyes were charming, whereas there they were large and open. Here there were sidelong glances. This is a typical Ajanta feature, and elaborate braids which were bedecked with pearls. And like I told you already about the modeling or the light and shade, it is contour modeling, that is close to the edges of the body or the edges of the tree, whichever that they were modeling. By modeling, I mean shading. And great
Okay.
understanding of human and animal anatomy, foreshortening, back view of the person, the graceful flexion of the body, all this was not present earlier. All right, because we have very little that we saw.
Right. Let's talk about the people who made these murals, the artists. Do we know anything at all about the artists who painted these murals?
Next to no knowledge, because nobody signed. In India, it was always a community expression, it was the expression of the collective, and it was always about harmony. It was never about the present day individuality or individual expression. So none of these artists' names do we know. All that we know is that it was done during the period of the Satavahana and Vakataka empires, and the artists were drawn from both the empires across, because it stretched across. It was a vast empire, and they came from the entire area. There's just one inscription from K15 which talks about a Sutradhara or a master builder. That is how much we know. Whether he contributed to the painting program in any way, we do not know. And one more feature, very interesting, is that several artists seems to have divided a wall among themselves. So there were groups of artists working, and so it's very interesting to see that the main doorway, the painting on the main doorway, that is just a decorative painting, but all around us he seated Buddha figures. Now we notice that all the Buddha figures to the left are bright, and they are dark to the right. And the same follows below also. There are floral decorations, there are geometric decorations. So there are three levels of Buddha figures, floral and geometric patterns. And we see this difference all along the three layers. So there probably was an overall understanding of the theme and the topic and the subject matter among the artists, but the paintings were not identical.
Right. Now, moving on to the subject of this art. We know that most of these panels depict scenes from the Jatakas. Now, before I ask Dr. Alamelu about the artwork at Ajanta, Akila or Kaushik, would you like to tell our listeners very briefly what are Jatakas?
Yes, Vijay, I'll take that story. See, these Buddhists, they were very charming storytellers. They had this tradition of passing on good moral values through folk stories known as Jatakas. The hero of these Jataka stories is invariably the Buddha in one of his previous births. And each story would depict the future Buddha as an example of some important virtue. And one of the most famous Jatakas is about King Vesantara, who was an epitome of generosity, one who never hesitated to give even during very difficult times. So Vesantara was this ideal king who was loved and respected by all his subjects. So it seems once his neighboring kingdom, Kalinga, was hit by a terrible famine. And without thinking, Vesantara lent his royal elephant to them. You see, this royal elephant had a magic quality. It could bring prosperity wherever it went. Now you can imagine his subjects were not at all very pleased by what he did, isn't it? He had given away the country's treasure. So Vesantara decided to abdicate and settle in the forest with his wife and sons. He shed his royal robes, and with his wife and children, he left the palace in a chariot. Now, along the way, he gave away his horses, then he gave away his chariot. Very soon, can you believe, he even gave away his children as an ultimate sacrifice. And he was wandering alone and desolate in the forest. His body was thin and emaciated, his hair was all matted up. It was a terrible uh, time that this great king was going through. But by now, even the gods were moved. So they made things happen, They made sure that the royal elephant was returned. His children were reunited with him, and soon enough, the people made him king once again. So you see, this story, it takes us through the difficult life that Vesantara lived and just teaches us the importance of human kindness. And this story is portrayed ever so dramatically somewhere in the Ajanta caves.
I thought probably that the Jataka tales were also supposed to be morally instructive. In each birth, Buddha does
You are
something
right. You are
that's
right.
worth emulating, and that's how he
They are
uplifts the
model
people
citizens.
with that
You are right.
example.
Yes, yes, you are right. They are model citizens, and they model, almost like impossible morals. But they did it, and that is why they are superhuman, and that's why they are eligible to become Buddha.
Very interesting. So, Dr. Alamelu, tell us how is this scene, this entire scene, the story of Vesantara, depicted at Ajanta? What do we get to see there?
We get to see important scenes, and we get to see the procession of where Prince Vesantara comes with his family after having renounced his material wealth, and because he is seen in ascetic dress, and we recognize him as a king because of the umbrella that one of the attenders is holding on top. And the idea of a procession, the artist conveys it so beautifully. You can almost sense the movement, as if it's on a road, because they're on like a slope. And we also see the other personages in the this dramatic scene, where his wife and his children are also there, and they would all accompany him uh, when he is sent on exile. So that is the important scene, that is on the road. And to suggest that this is indeed an outdoor scene, we get to see trees behind them, and palm trees they are, so
Oh,
beautifully. Yes, and they have been depicted beautifully. And then here the artist brings in a very, very interesting little detail, a nugget, from everyday life. So there is a window there, and through that, two women are looking out, peeping, and looking at the what is happening around in such high echelons of life, and whispering amongst themselves. So that's another very little, interesting vignette. And then the next to that, immediately we get to see the royal interior, and that is of course Pathos, because it's the Prince Vesantara's mother and King Sanjaya sitting. Sanjaya is comforting his wife, and all royal women wear clothes which are very diaphanous, that is transparent, and they wear rich jewelry and so on. So she is wearing all that, but her posture is very obvious that she has just about, and she's in despair, and the king is comforting her. And we get to see the royal interior, and not just that, we get to see the three attenders who are so concerned because the queen is almost fainting. So they're trying to get
oh.
water for her, etc. They're looking up because it does affect them, that she is their, mistress, and she is affected. So we get to see all that in this. And another, the same thing, just to witness this kind of a person, Indra makes sure um, that he comes down and makes sure that Vesantara indeed is the blessed soul that he is supposed to be. Only then he can become Buddha. So he's that evolved soul. So he comes to see it, and that scene is portrayed so beautifully by the Ajanta painter, because you get to see diagonal movement. They could have presented him coming down vertically also, but just to remember that dynamism is more well represented when it is across. And so everything is at a diagonal. So whatever they wear around their neck, the tassels of their dresses, the hair, everything is to from left to right. And there are musicians, everyone is descending to witness this great scene when Vesantara has given up everything. So there's so many emotional, like I told you, there's greed, there's despair, there's movement, there's beauty. There is this turbaned Apsara. She is another girl who, we always see in book covers of Ajanta. Beauty. She is a beauty. So we get to see those sidelong glances, the lovely pearls that she wears, her dusky skin. And that's one thing here. Indra is fair, but the Apsaras is a celestial maiden. She is dark. So across, the um, what do you call it? Strata of society, We'll get the Emperor Sanjaya is represented dark. The queen is light. Here, Apsaras is dark. So the skin consciousness as dark and fair
It's very
seems
evident.
yeah.
Yeah, it is quite amazing, isn't it? How much these paintings can tell us about the society of the times.
Yes, yes. There is so much that they do tell us. Here we get to see textiles, what they wear, diaphanous costumes. That would mean such thin, material that they were able to weave. And
Weave,
their
that's
the
right.
yeah, architecture suggests the understanding of principles of materials and putting up structures from foundation to top. So their the technology of the time period and use of pearl or metal jewelry and so on. Again, technology and the way the pillars are painted, no, so interesting it is. And wooden architecture is what we get to see. That's why I think most of them are not around, and
Yeah,
they
because the wood,
probably yeah
yeah,
they probably were painted also.
it's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, history, architecture, art, everything is connected in one painting.
That's why Ajanta is not so much about Buddhism as about it's like a vast pageant of life, no, unfolding
Mm.
before us.
Probably we should talk about one different kind of artistry as well. We talked so much about the paintings. I was thinking about the stone masons that they must have used. You know, coming down from the top of a cliff, cutting
Correct.
slats and moving slowly and carving and gouging so many things from nothing, from thick walls, you come to pillars and,
You're right. You're
arches and
right.
things like that.
Yeah.
They,
See
they must
the
have been fantastic people. And basalt is not an
it
easy
is
thing to cut.
yeah, it's a hard stone, like I told you, and they had to start from top to bottom, and they had to visualize everything. So it's not like assembling, no, it's not like construction. This is excavation. So where they are subtracting material, and it's difficult. They had to, completely visualize it and do it. They had to start from top, and they are all like in situ, which means on site. So they couldn't afford to go wrong.
Also, the lighting, I'm guessing that would have been a problem inside the caves.
Totally, totally. I told you they are dark inside, right? So how did they kind of manage to paint inside would be that they painted the walls white. That would give it a, that kind of light inside. And yes, and they had metal reflectors. They had
Oh,
metal mirrors. Yeah, they didn't
uh-huh.
have the present day mercury mirrors. They had metal mirrors which would
Mm.
reflect the sun. And on the ground, they, filled it. They had slight depressions and they filled it with water and let the sunlight be reflected on it to be recast on the ceiling. So
How
these are all
ingenious.
clever
Ah,
ways.
really?
Right. Isn't it also true that some of the artwork from the caves is now completely lost to us? And it seems some panels have really deteriorated. So, tell us what kind of efforts have been taken to preserve this art.
We know that Hyun Sang, the Chinese traveler, visited India and he had seen it. So right till the 8th century, people it was accessible to the common public. After that, there is no mention. After that, the next mention is only in the 19th century, 1819 CE, when John Smith discovered. So all the while it was hidden. But from 1819 CE began the effacement, and we know John Smith had to put his signature. He was also known as Tiger Smith. So he put his signature that he was on a tiger hunt and happened to discover Janta for us. Good, but he also put his signature. So that was the first act of vandalism. And from then on till 1929, it continued. It was open and people could just have free access to it. And they appointed a person called Narayan Eknath as a curator. What he did was obliged tourists with souvenirs. One of them was, yeah,
Oh,
it's really sad that he would have given more, but one has surfaced and it was auctioned in 1922 at Sotheby's and it is now in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in the USA. It's called the Group of Five Male Heads. So he was able to remove and give away pieces. So that so a person who was supposed to be put in charge himself was giving it away. So after that, people took care, and a person, these Italian experts called Orsini and Ciccioni, these two were commissioned by the British to restore the paintings because they were deteriorating, and that was natural. It was discovered in 1819. I'm talking about 1920 21. So 100 years had lapsed and so much had happened. So they were asked to, restore the paintings. What they did was they gave it a varnish coating on top completely. That kind of protected it, but also gave it a dark color. So, and that hid some paintings too. So, several people were asked to copy these works earlier. So that's how we get the knowledge of these works. That's also important for us as art historians and people who are interested in art. Like Robert Gill did it all through 1840s to 1860s. John Griffiths did it in 1872 to 1885. Then Lady Herringham in 1915. And Yazdani copies 4 volumes in 1933. All these only are our sources now as art teachers to go back to say what was in what painting and so on. So that kind of preservation is there as drawings, as copies is there. But as for the paintings themselves, there were bird droppings, bat droppings, soot from lamps of people who visited, and also unequal expansion and contraction of plaster between the upper layer and lower layer and the pigment layers over the plaster and the weakening bond to the stone. So, all this contributed to the paint or the plaster flaking off. Besides this, uh, there has been a digital restoration that's been happening at the site by a person called Prasad Power. So, what he does is he takes the paintings as they are and tries to fill in the gap looking at the rest of the works. So, that is the digital restoration that he has done.
Right. But that also must be quite a task, no? Since I'm guessing he can't really use flash photography inside.
Nothing,
I
nothing.
read something about Prasad Pawar that he's a remarkable guy.
Yes,
Apparently, since like Vijay mentioned, you can't use flash or floodlights or something like that.
right.
He uses natural sunlight, and natural sunlight falls into the cave
For a very
at
short
different
time.
angles,
Correct.
in different times of the year.
And he
So
has
he
to take
uses
care
that.
of that. Yeah,
So he has to wait for the right moment till the right segment is lit
that's
up.
right. That's why
And if
he's
he
worked for 3 decades.
Yeah, and I believe if he misses one day in a year, one segment is gone. He has to come back
Exactly,
next
exactly.
year to see that segment.
Yeah, you're right.
So
Yeah.
what a labor of love.
Yes. But with Ajanta, it's always been like that. Whether the drawings that they did, Robert Gill or John Griffiths, all decades or more people went in. And Yazdani did it in 30s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So that again, I'm talking about decades, no, 3 decades.
There's something else about that Major Gill who did the paintings copy.
Mm.
And there must be something very attractive about Ajanta because he goes away with the copies and they are burnt in the museum in a fire, and the guy comes back all over again to start all over again. What dedication!
True, absolutely true. But then I suppose it is an effort that's worth all that time and more. After all, they say the influence of Ajanta went way beyond Ajanta itself, didn't it?
Yes, look at all the other cultures that have absorbed Ajanta into their system. You can see this very obviously at Ellora because it was created shortly after Ajanta and is fairly close by. But deep down south, the Pallavas and the Cholas also adopted Ajanta ideas. It seems even Chinese, Japanese, and Korean paintings reflected Ajanta's
And don't
influence.
forget the paintings on the Sigiriya rock in Sri Lanka.
That's right. So that's why they say it's a fountainhead and it is at the center of especially the painting. It's the kind of a hub for all the other traditions, and Buddhism did flow to all these countries that we are talking about.
Yeah, true. And it is amazing, isn't it, that the techniques these people used 2000 years ago, they carried through for the next 1000 years at least,
Yes,
and to all these
yes,
distant
yes,
places.
yes, yes. You're right. You're right. 1,000 years.
Great. So, on that note, we end today's podcast. Thank you, Dr. Alamelu, for that very interesting talk, quite eye opening and very, very fascinating. Thanks for your time today.
You're most welcome. Thank you. But it's a pleasure to share it with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How did you like this episode? Do subscribe to the Story Trails podcast and consider supporting us on Patreon. We have many more stories to tell, and you will find them in our short video series, blog, and audio tours. Links on our website www.storytrails.in. We'll meet you in the next episode with yet another exciting story.